but it's really neat, as the company is growing and seeing all of these gifts and talents in my brothers that I haven't really seen because we haven't really done anything, this type of business or this type of craftsmanship coming together is really super fun.
You're listening to the Art and War podcast with your hosts, Mitch and Nathan. Mitch is a former airborne infantry squad leader who now spends most of his time coaching soccer. Nathan is a professional illustrator and an avid shooter with a couple of years of Canadian military experience. Together, they run the Seaburn Art page. Enjoy the show.
You'll edit it out.
All right. Realistically, anyone that, we've totally doxed twice now.
Yeah.
Oh, good heavens.
Yes, and we've doxed him a ton of times, but he's missed his name twice. But at the same time, anyone who cares enough to know his name knows all of our names and social security numbers. So
it's true. I did see that Facebook deleted a whole bunch of face recognition data today, or at least they announced that they did, which means that they are either about to get in trouble for something or someone else is about to get in trouble for something, and Facebook just wanted to preemptively get ahead of that.
Oh my God. I don't like that at all.
We should talk.
I don't like that even a little bit.
Yeah, we should.
No, it's
our buddy, tech guy.
It's incredibly terrifying when suddenly Facebook is like, what's dangerous? Face recognition data. We just deleted many terabytes of it for your safety. It's like, uh-oh.
But you had it to begin with.
Yeah. Well, they assured us that there was not an issue, but then now it's being deleted, so means something.
Yeah. It's similarly, remember a couple weeks ago when Facebook just went offline, and I brought this up during the podcast then too. So at the same time, Facebook's down, Instagram's down, a bunch of things go down, major cellular telecommunications outages in the United States, and the first thing that came to my mind is like, is this it? And the second part of that came to my mind is, this will be very good for people, I think.
Yes.
But at the same time,
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, same. Absolutely. The first thing that came to my mind too was the fact that it happened during the whole whistleblowing thing, and which I guess is still going on. That's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that, honestly. I know Mark Zuckerberg is constantly in front of Congress, and I always wonder why, but I never care enough to look into it.
I don't know. He's a lizard man.
Yes.
I've said this before. If there's any lizard men, like they might all be lizard men, there might only be one lizard man, but if there's a lizard man, it's Mark Zuckerberg.
It's interesting. He seems to be getting yellower as time goes on. He looks more and more like Data from Star Trek every day.
Well, our editor always gets mad at us for never introducing the guests right away. So today,
right,
it's fine.
Yes.
Yeah, today we got Isaac Botkin. He's a doer of stuff and things at T.REX Arms, and
yes,
a doer of electric bikes, and
a nerdy engineer,
yeah.
if you will.
Yep.
Also has a very good podcast, T.REX Arms, T.REX Talks, which is on anywhere you listen to podcasts, I guess.
In theory, yeah. Well, it's good to talk to you guys. So I have listened to one episode of your podcast, and obviously,
I'm so sorry.
I was going to catch more up with the style of the podcast, what you guys generally talk about. So I did listen to the one episode that you guys did without any guests, which is probably not a great idea. But in the middle of that podcast, you were talking about me, which was so weird. I've never heard myself talked about in the third person in a podcast before. Like, I'm not saying I got out of my chair to look behind me, but I did do a quick 360, like just subconsciously, like.
And confirm, Mitch was outside the window. I was in the bushes.
But you guys had some questions related to things. So this is not, we have interacted on Instagram, which is weird. I'm not a fan of Instagram, but I have actually interacted with a bunch of people that I've met on Instagram and have really enjoyed that. So as much shade as we throw at Zuckerberg and as problematic as Instagram is, I actually have really enjoyed my time getting to meet people in the gun industry and like-minded people through T.REX on Instagram. So I should throw that out there after saying terrible things about Zuckerberg earlier. Terrible, but true things just a moment ago.
That's interesting. I view social media kind of like I view, for example, like telecommunications or anything. Social media is just such a like a monolithic behemoth that takes up so much of our lives and we use it for so much, it's really hard to get away from it. And you're right, it does have really redeeming qualities in terms of just like meeting people, getting connected, etc. But oh, sorry, Gatorade burp. Ah,
We've wanted to talk to you though for a while, like not just over Instagram, because
Yeah.
we talked over Instagram, I think, periodically. But I remember watching your lives when you would sit under a tree. I think you were in a chair. Sometimes you weren't. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, this is the type of person that I would like to interact with and just kind of like pick his brain and get to know about him. Just and that's kind of our whole podcast. I know you listened to our episode where there was no guests, which I brain dump half the things that we say on the
I don't
podcast.
I don't remember anything that
Yeah.
I think I listened to that episode afterwards. I don't listen to all of ours, but it was pretty good, I think. I want to say.
Yeah. So I personally am not a huge fan of people rambling to themselves podcasts. I like monologues to be structured, driven, etc., or maybe live Q&A, which we often do. But two people or three people talking and being kind of rambly and thinking out loud, I do find very interesting. Not just to get to know people, but listening to people think out loud is always kind of interesting and revealing, for sure.
Yeah, I think when we started, we had a couple episodes that we ended up deleting because I felt like we were trying too hard to sound like we knew what we were talking about a lot of the time about things that we didn't really have a place to be talking about. And we were like, why are we doing this? Why are we going to try and change everything that we've been doing for the last couple of years with the page of just being a genuine, as genuine as we could? Why are we going to change it up for a podcast? And we ended up scrapping a couple episodes, and now it's just, there's not really any structure. I remember you're not the only guest that asks, like, oh, what are the topics? And I never know how to answer.
Yeah.
It's always like, I don't know. I just want to talk to you.
Yeah.
And you guys seem like, so one of the things that I appreciate you guys, both you guys as, human beings, like actual like persons, but also what you're doing on Instagram and what the podcast is it is an extremely normal, very pretentious free thing that you're doing. You're teaching people stuff, bringing your skill sets to bear, whether they be the knowledge that you are imparting to people or the artwork that makes things more understandable than just, say, photography. But at the same time, in a very transparent way that I appreciate. In the gun industry, I mean, this is true of, I think, every industry, but in the gun industry in particular, there's a lot of, I don't know, there's just a lot of work to put up facades, maybe. There's just a lot of things like, you have to do this way. This topic needs to be treated this way. And having people just sit around and be like, I don't know, maybe bikes, maybe electric bikes would be cool. Or like when I was up in Canada doing such and such, this happened. There's and I think that there's a strong element of that in T.REX. Any group of people that starts a company like T.REX and then calls it T.REX Arms, we don't take ourselves super seriously. And I feel like what you guys are doing on Instagram is kind of, I don't know, I feel like tonally there are a lot of similarities there. So I am eager to have a regular human conversation and just hang out, as opposed to like, well, we must do a brand combo crossover and make sure that we synergize both of our market audiences.
That nothing makes me go to sleep faster than corporate talk. How do you do, fellow kids?
Yeah,
exactly.
Working within the industry with Mira, I have noticed that there is a lot of exactly what you said. Everybody's like, oh, well, we can do this and then we can cross promote and do all these really cool things. And I'm sure it's great for marketing and all that. I mean, I know it is because I see it happening and it is good, but it feels like if I wasn't this thing, then you definitely would not give me the time of day to just talk to me. And I hate that about the industry. I really do.
Yeah, and I think that that's not the whole industry, for sure. I've met a lot of really cool people, sometimes in business relationship contexts, which that sounds super corporate speak when I say it out loud. but also just through Instagram. And I think that you see this both real and fake, like YouTube collaborations. Sometimes it is a very calculated way for two channels to try to leverage each other's diverse market space, whatever's. And other times it's people who are just like, oh, you're a cool dude. I would love to do a project with you. Or this guy over here is neat. I bet you the people that like my stuff would like his stuff. So I think there's a lot more room for that in the industry. And I feel like I am talking about stuff I barely know about in some ways, because T.REX is a very young company. We haven't been a part of the gun industry per se for very long. And so there's all kinds of stuff that has happened before us, stuff that happened in the early 2000s, stuff that happened in the 90s, stuff that happened in the 80s that shaped a lot of the companies that exist in this space and shaped a lot of the ways that companies do things that we weren't here for. We hear about them kind of around the campfire, so to speak. But yeah, it's been fascinating to be in this the gun industry, and that was one of the things I wanted to pick your brains about is what it's been like for you guys to kind of break into that.
Mitch, you go first.
Good and bad.
It's been good and bad. Much like yourself, I have met some really great people, and I'm working with one now, Nathan. I mean, we met through Instagram, and then we started this page. Without him, my content would still be making really terrible memes and making walls of text with information that is really boring to read and not easily digestible.
Oh, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, I met him, getting to talk. I think every one of our guests that we've had, it's always been people that we just either wanted to get to know more or like more. And there's so many. There is a very toxic side where, if something happens, it turns more into like that cancel culture that we always make fun of. But there's always there's good and bad. It's very much a double-edged sword, but I'm enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it myself.
Yeah, I think it's a neat place to be.
Yeah. In terms of me, I didn't actually intend on being part of this industry at all. It just kind of happened. Or community or anything like that. I was reading Mitch's work for a long time, back when it was the Walls of Text guide. And don't beat yourself up, Mitch. I liked him quite a bit, hence, why I was friggin' reading him. Never really intended on being part of it. And one day, Mitch gets banned, comes back, and I go, hey, you want me to draw one of these guides for you? You want me to like add some visuals? And the collaboration started. It's been a good experience so far. I'm really surprised and very thankful that people enjoy the stuff as much as they do.
It's definitely more of a friendship first.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most about it, because we could get rid of this page and we would still talk.
Yeah, 100%.
We'd still communicate. We'd still talk with a lot of the people that we've met. So it's
we did get rid of we didn't get rid of the page, but we didn't have the page for a month, and we just talked.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. I mean, I don't remember you talking, but I remember the page being gone for a month.
Yeah.
I hope you don't remember us talking.
Yeah. Isaac is everywhere.
Yep.
But yeah, other than that, like the experiences in the industry so far, great. Absolutely great. Getting to meet people like you, for instance, whole bunch of folks, basically everyone. And I knock social media a ton as well. A ton. I think it's one of the worst things that's happened to this generation. But fuck me if it hasn't actually actively improved my life. So
yeah, I think it's like a lot of tools. It's a double-edged sword, like all technologies. When you combine it with cultural developments that sap people's discipline, it's negative. But if you are actually able to use it properly, tons of opportunities come out of it. I mean, and of all people, I should not be criticizing social media. T.REX Arms exists because Lucas started an Instagram page. Like all of our marketing and success has come through Instagram and YouTube. So yeah, as terrible as those corporations are, it's pretty pretty hypocritical of me to point some of these things out and bite the hand that is sort of feeding us. Of course, that hand is also hitting us occasionally. So like some good give and take,
making teenagers kill themselves, but
give and take. That's
yeah. Well, but no, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you bring that up though, because I'm curious. Before T.REX Arms is a thing. What's going on with you? What are you doing? Because I know vaguely.
Oh,
I remember we've talked about it a bit, but you have a very interesting past that I feel like isn't talked about too much, and now I want to know more about it.
yes. So this is the weird thing about the internet. If you Google around, you can find out a bunch of stuff about people, but there's this black hole that is the early 90s. If you look for stuff that happened in the early 90s, it doesn't really exist. Earlier than that, stuff gets documented because it has historical value. And then recently, everything is on the internet. So I worked on a whole bunch of stuff that isn't really searchable because it's sort of a little bit pre-internet. So a lot of documentaries, worked at a couple of TV stations in New Zealand, um, and just was more involved in video production, film and television work. And one of the things that I really appreciate from that, I appreciate a lot of stuff from that, but it enabled me to dip my fingers into a whole bunch of different industries. When I was working as a commercial video guy, I would do marketing videos or commercial videos for people in the medical community, people in the military community, and so forth. So I got to feel get a little bit of a feel, very surface level, but a little bit of a different feel for a bunch of different industries, and go to trade shows for this industry and trade shows for that industry, banking trade show, credit card trade show. And Yeah, I really appreciate the experiences that I've had through that. And the reason that I was in media at all is because that was my dad's business. That was something that when I was about 5, Dad came home from his job and wanted to be home more and started a business that was video production. In the early 90s, we lived in the Washington, D.C. area. And so he began doing largely political media. So he would do campaign commercials, he would do political documentaries, he would do uh, various stuff for think tanks in Washington, and so that's what I grew up doing. And he started that business so that it was something that he could actually control and involve his family in. He was also homeschooling us, so when I was quite young, I got to go along to be part of some of these film shoots. Well, they were video shoots. I only did a few film shoots. These video shoots with different people and interview different folks that we were interviewing for documentaries or making their campaign commercials or just talking about different projects with. So I really appreciate that. I think that was just a tremendous thing. And you can see, I think, in all of the Botkins, um, and I would say all the way down to Lucas, but in some ways, especially Lucas, the work ethic that our parents put into us. Um, but because I was the oldest, I spent more time with Dad doing media stuff, and that was generally what I had been doing most and primarily. My brother David, who is now the CFO of T.REX, got more into. He did a lot of video stuff, but also a lot of computer and IT stuff when we were living in New Zealand. And then Lucas didn't help out professionally with video a whole lot because of how much younger he was, but he got a bunch of that stuff through osmosis. He's a phenomenal videographer in his own right and editor, and has really mastered that craft. Even though I don't remember him helping on a whole lot of the projects when I was young and he was very small. So I got into video and film as a career, and yeah, it has led me through a bunch of different really interesting experiences and opportunities. But in some ways, I feel like T.REX, what we're doing with T.REX is not all that different. Even though I am far more focused on the manufacturing side than the video side, it's still a huge part of what we do. And even some of the stuff that we were doing. One of the very first video shoots that I went to with Dad that I was a part of was a video that we were making for Gun Owners of America. So Larry Pratt was shooting different guns. I'm trying to remember. If I could remember the bill, it would help me figure out exactly when this was. I think it was like 11 or 12. And I was running audio for the shoot where Larry Pratt is talking about the Mac 10, the terrifying Mac 1011, and then he's holding up a little Browning 25, shoots the same bullet as this gun, and demonstrating ballistic. I don't think it was ballistic gel. I think it was watermelon. So yeah, this is not like a vast departure from what I grew up doing. Stuff that's been, our family has been involved in for years and years and years. So yeah. long answer to that question. But I think that covers a lot of the ground. So a lot of the stuff that our parents brought us up in, and our dad let us be a part of, really heavily informs what we're doing today, even though in many ways it looks very different. You know, manufacturing, making stuff out of plastic, retail stuff, e-commerce, all those things are pretty new.
How's it going, people? My name is BR, I'm the producer of the Art and War podcast, and I'm here to tell you about the Lads Patreon. Not only do we want to continue improving the quality of what we can do both here on the show and on Instagram, but we also want to elevate what we can do as a team. To that end, we are looking at acquiring property and starting a cult in the wilderness so we can shoot at trash and be left alone. So that's what the Patreon's going towards. Of course, the Art and War podcast is no charity case, so what's in it for you? Our Patreon subscribers enjoy 5 different tiers of exclusive perks, ranging from all of the content the lads would post on a pre-Zuckerberg Instagram, downloadable high-resolution guides, behind-the-scenes info like guest schedules, spicy memes, and at our highest tier, get monthly art commissions created by Nathan himself. You can find our Patreon via the link in this episode's description, or in the Seaburn Art page's bio on Instagram. This would usually be the part where I say, let's get back to Isaac from T.REX Arms, but Mitch and Nathan forgot to do the AWS and Applied Gear plugs, so now I gotta do that. So anyway, AWS belts. Nathan and Mitch love their SMU belts. Mitch himself has been running their gear for years across deployments and heavy use at home long before any sponsorship deals took place. He digs them. If you're in need of a good pistol belt, go and grab one of them via the AWS link in the description of the show and use code RNWAR10 all connected for $10 off. We also have Applied Gear to thank. If you're in need of a rigid EDC belt for daily carry, check out their link in the description and use code RNWAR5 for $5 off any Applied Gear belts. Thanks for listening, people. Now let's get back to Isaac Botkin from T.REX Arms.
So were you always homeschooled, or did you go to a public or a private school, and then that's when your dad was like, okay, I'm going to do this videography and do all this work, and we're also going to homeschool you?
I was always homeschooled.
Okay.
So, and I'm pretty old. I am 40 years old. So I was being
Really?
homeschooled
You
pretty
do not look
early
40.
on in those days. Yes, I'm very old. But that was not at the very beginning of kind of the recent homeschooling revolution in the United States, but it was fairly early on. And so, yeah, never went to school. None of the siblings went to school. I tried to do a college correspondence course, but it was right after we'd moved to New Zealand, and the passport and citizenship and foreign student thing was just too much trouble. So that wasn't working out. I started working in New Zealand instead, and never ended up actually pursuing any of that after that. So yeah.
Well, no, it's good that you were able to get your hand in all those different, fingers in all those different pots, because it's that experience that you don't think translates over. I found from getting involved in so many things myself, there's little things that you don't really think about that translate very well into everything that you want to do. You can take those past experiences and apply it to what you're doing now, or what you want to do, or what you want to build. And I think having that diverse set of experiences really is an invaluable thing that, a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of people don't get, because I'm sure there are a lot of people that do, but it seems like people, ever since, they're in high school, and then, okay, you're going to college, you have to pick what you're going to study, and then what you're going to study, you have to do for the rest of your life, or else you're not going to make enough money to pay off what you just studied. And it makes a very linear path for a lot of people that I think, I don't know, people seem to be, I think they're missing out on a lot of different things that they can end up doing.
Yeah, and it's certainly not rare these days that people will start doing job A and have to switch careers. Like, I forget what the studies say, but it is very common for people to need to switch careers. But I do think that it's easy to fall into this trap of, I started off doing job A, now I'm doing job B. It's a new thing. And there probably is a ton of transferable stuff if you apply your mind to really figuring out, like, what have I learned in automotive repair that I can move over to this thing over here. And I have this theory that I've been developing. So I'm beginning to homeschool my own kids. And so I'm thinking a lot more, I'm trying to remember all the stuff that I should have paid more attention to when I was a kid. But I'm thinking more about, like, how to teach people how to learn. specifically very small children. But eventually they're going to be full-sized humans. How do I teach them how to learn? How did my parents teach me how to learn? Because I really think that this is the main thing that education should be doing, and it's the thing that schooling is often the worst at. The school system generally is like, well, you need to pass these standardized tests, and then you get put in this box. And it isn't really focused on teaching people how to learn. And my current operating theory is to give people shelves in their brain that they can put information on. And so when they come across a new fact, or they learn a new thing, or they have to grab a new skill, they already have a shelf to put it on. They already have kind of an organizational structure for things. And I think that my parents did a really good job of that. Maybe not specifically consciously. And maybe it was that just as I was doing different stuff and needing to learn different things to help Dad with the video business, he did a good job of explaining, like, you need to be organized about how you actually acquire this skill and how quickly you need to figure out how to do this. But I think that is, it's a tremendously important thing, especially in the world that we live in. We see people having to change careers a lot. The world changes. Retail has changed drastically. Like when I was a kid, malls were a thing. Malls were a very important part of your life when I was young. There was no internet. There were libraries. The world has changed drastically, not just for young whippersnappers that I can't relate to because I'm so old, but also like my parents have seen drastic economic changes, and people that are my parents' age have had to switch jobs across, kind of amazing generational and technological gulfs. And this ability to learn new stuff and adapt is, I think, super important. It's the main thing that I want to teach my kids, because I have no confidence in my ability to predict which skills would be useful for them to have in 2045. Outside of, foraging, scavenging, reloading, stuff like that.
How to hide from Skynet robots.
Yeah, I'm working on defeating thermal sensors. I think that's something that my kids may need to know.
We're going to talk about that more after this podcast, because that's something I've been looking into a lot, and I wanted to pick your brain about. Thank you for reminding me.
Taliban figured it out a little bit. They used to, because they figured out that we have drones, and what they used to do, they maybe they still do, I don't know. They used to dig holes, and then they would take wet blankets and just kind of like put it over that hole, and they would put weapons, they would put themselves in there, and it worked pretty well. We started to look for things that were a little bit cooler than the sand, but at night, it's a desert for the most part. It gets really cold. It snows, and it's difficult to tell. So they kind of figured it out at a very basic level. But it would be interesting if there was a more I don't know if I want to say practical, more accessible way, because we're not all in the
like
desert.
You're sort of planning for something. Yeah.
I got no plans for anything. I'm a
no,
broken.
Me neither. none of this is premeditated. Okay,
no, none at all.
Please don't drone strike me.
Especially in Canada. Yeah, that's the thing. In Canada, they're getting on people for their social media opinions now. So if you have an opinion that they don't like, that's a no-no. Big no-no.
And we're a few years behind the UK, and you're a few years behind us. In the UK, people are getting arrested for, saying slurs on social media or misgendering their kids.
Oh, yeah.
Took your advice on the whole energy drink thing, and I'm detoxing. No energy drinks. Nothing. I'm doing with South Pew Luke. I think the videographer from Modlight. We're both cutting out caffeine entirely for like 3 weeks, and I feel fucking great. It's wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, I have not stopped drinking caffeine for years now. I used to try to detox once a year, and I don't know, around child number 2, that just didn't become an option anymore.
Yeah,
I'm kind of hypocritical, but I am very critical of Rain for no other reason that Luke loves it so much. So between the two of us, I feel like we don't exactly even out, but I'm not hurting the company by talking about how dangerous their product is, because Lucas is just holding it up.
Constantly, all the time.
So don't take all of that as seriously as I make it sound. And
I won't lie.
I'm drinking a lot of coffee.
Yeah.
Well,
the American Rain scares me a little bit. I found out it's got double the caffeine that Canadian Rain has.
300 milligrams, baby.
300 fucking milligrams.
That's what we run off of. America runs off of caffeine.
Apparently. Dunkin' Donuts is pretty dope, though. It's I mean, I've only ever had it in like airports, but
You're reminding me that I should actually detox again. It's good to take a month or two off of caffeine, rebuild those neurotransmitters or neuroreceptors or whatever they are, and then get back to that sweet caffeine.
yeah, I miss it. I won't. Every couple days, I'll go to Tim Hortons. I'll buy myself a nice large decaf and just sip it slowly, thinking about the good times. All of 2 weeks ago.
Decaf will kill you fast, though, man.
Wait, what?
Just kidding.
Wait, are you fucking with me?
I have heard that, but I have no information to back it up. I'm just like, yeah, I'm gonna get you off of all non-water drinks.
all
That's my new
non-water
mission.
drinks. Essentially, I'll just be having water with like a little bit of salt put into it.
Tea? Don't you know that all the people who drank tea back in the 1700s are dead now?
You're killing me. I just poured this.
I got my plain Jane water in my blue cup. Before we started talking about super secret stuff that nobody will ever hear about, but should be jealous that they didn't hear about it. We were
it's
kind
a
of
lot
talking
of really
about
spicy stuff.
Yep, we were kind of talking about our families and things that we've done kind of before setting foot into the industry. One thing that I really want to ask you about, and this might go into super secret territory again, we'll see. I find that if I tell people my story about how I was brought up, when I was 2 or 3 years old, my stepfather gave me unloaded 22 and was like, "Here you go, this is yours." And I learned responsibility like that. I learned to grow up in a very different way in a different time, and I'm relatively young, but growing up and doing that. And sometimes I tell people and they're like, "Oh, you were abused. You have terrible parents." And it's always kind of bothered me to a point where I'm like, whatever. I don't really know them too much. But one thing I've noticed about T.REX Arms and just you and your family in general is you are very transparent about a lot of things. And that brings a lot of criticism. And I feel like a lot of that criticism comes because you're in the public light and because you are transparent about it. Does that bother you, like whenever you get some of those comments or some of those things get brought up? How does that affect you and your family over time, if at all?
That's a good question. Yeah. So that's a very interesting question. I've actually given some thought to this because our time in I don't know. So part of the reason it's weird to hear you guys talking about me in last week's podcast or 2 weeks ago's podcast is I really don't think of myself as being so much in the public eye. Now, if you ask, I'd be like, well, why, yes, our Instagram channel does have a lot of views. Yes, our YouTube channel has a lot of subscribers, and I'm on there occasionally. But I really don't think of myself that way. But I think I think we're in the public eye in a very small sector of a small industry. Like you guys are well known in a small chunk of the industry. There's a soft drink in New Zealand, world famous in New Zealand. You guys are world famous in a small chunk of the firearm industry. And T.REX is world famous in this little subculture of gun people. And I really appreciate that. We have that platform and that opportunity to talk about stuff. But yeah, it definitely comes with a downside of people being very free with their opinions, which, I mean, I guess there's no way to separate these. If you have the opportunity to talk to tens of thousands of people, you also have the opportunity for tens of thousands of people to give their very candid opinions of you. And there's really no disentangling those things. And so it shouldn't complain about it too much. But I do think you do have to compartmentalize a little bit and kind of separate the different kinds of criticisms. And there's definitely criticism that is meant to be constructive criticism and should be accepted as such, or at least appreciated as such. It may not always be correct. Like there are people giving us business advice for T.REX, like you should give more product away. Yeah, maybe so. You should give all your product away. Yeah, no, probably not. That's not really how you stay in business. And,
Yep.
and then there's destructive criticism that is meant to be destructive. And I think that should also be analyzed too, because destructive criticism that's meant to be discouraging and to destroy might still be right. Like it still could be a legitimate criticism that they're bringing up, but you also can't live with it and internalize it. So I think that the incorrect destructive criticism you got to throw away. The factually correct destructive criticism you should pay some attention to, but also only give it a certain amount of credence. And then the constructive criticism that is correct is probably worth its weight in gold. And then the constructive criticism that is not factually correct, you should also throw away. But be encouraged that people are trying to help and do actually value you or your company or your goals or your mission enough that they would like to pitch in, even though their boneheaded ideas are would not help you accomplish those goals. So I think that that's a very important thing that we also learn from our parents, because when our parents began homeschooling us, not to make this episode entirely homeschooling centric, but
we are very pro homeschool.
it's
had
going
a
to
whole
be
episode about homeschooling.
Yes, I haven't listened to that, but it's I have downloaded it. It's we're going to keep coming back to that, I think, because there's a lot of I think there's a lot of parallels to a lot of different things. But when my parents began homeschooling me, it was still early enough that there was a lot of stigma related to it. And so my parents got a lot of criticism for their decision to homeschool us kids in the States. And then we moved to New Zealand similarly. And so I've seen my parents deal with a lot of criticism, not to the tune of millions of YouTubers throwing shade at them, but I've watched my parents deal with this gracefully. And I've watched my parents deal with political persecution as well, because my dad was working in Washington. We got to see a lot of kind of the mudslinging up close and personal, and most of it was with people we were working with or the dad was working with, and we knew vaguely. But some of it was aimed directly at dad, and so this is something that all of us have seen our parents deal with, and so yeah, hopefully we've learned some really good lessons for them. But I don't really have a definitive answer for your question. These are just some thoughts and things that I've given as the company has grown and the types of criticism have kind of ranged and varied from thing to thing. Yeah, given some thought to this for sure, because my kids are growing up with this. They're going to watch me. They're going to watch me have a good day because somebody said something nice to me on YouTube, and they're going to watch me have a bad day because somebody said something lame to me on YouTube. If I'm not careful, and I really don't want them. I really don't want them to see me swayed. I mean, I don't want to be the kind of person who is swayed by random YouTube comments emotionally, and I don't want them to see that, and I don't want them to be affected by that either. So this is something that I have thought about kind of more and more, both as T.REX has grown, but also just as there are more people watching T.REX and more people watching me. And yeah, so some random unconnected thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, I like how you brought up your kids, because I recently just had a daughter, and I went back and reflected on a couple of the death threats that we have gotten on our page and things that have gotten a little personal with us. And
yeah,
there's a couple seconds, even maybe a couple minutes, where I reflect on it and I feel something inside of me. And I'm like, wow, like this is just some random person on the internet, but they kind of got to me for a second. And I think of it because I have a daughter now. When somebody says, yeah, I mean, we're going to come kill you if you stand in the way of progress, and your way of thinking is standing in the way of progress, I know that threat holds very, very little, if any, credibility behind it. But I think of my daughter, and and there's a lot of personal criticisms and attacks on you and your family. And I was thinking about that before we recorded. I was thinking and trying to put myself in your position, and I was thinking, I'm like, wow, like I've only gotten a couple. Lucas, Isaac, your David, all of them. I'm sure they all get a lot, and I see it. I know they get a lot. So I was just curious on how you worked through that in your head, because it's obvious that very little of them probably hold any credibility at all. But over time, the sheer quantity, I imagine, kind of lingers for a little bit longer than it felt like it should. Like mine, it lingered for like a minute or two, and I'm like, this is much longer than I should be paying attention to this.
Yeah. I will say one thing that is a little rough is criticisms of Lucas actually bother me more than people who are critical of me, partly because people who are critical of Lucas are more young and stupid and say dumber stuff. People who are critical of me usually have a pretty good point. They're like, hey, you got that ham radio thing totally wrong because you're an idiot. And it's like, oh, that holds water. It sure does. Lucas gets very vicious, vitriolic kinds of attacks. And those bug me a lot, partly because they are more extreme, but also because he is my little brother. I mean, he's a grown man and he's married and he's a super deadly shooter and he's the founder of this business. But I mean, he's still my little brother and always will be. And so that gets under my skin more than death threats or people picking at me. And he gets way more of those than I do. So that is a thing that bugs me for sure.
Yeah, it's something, I think it's unique that his audience, because I think you guys share a lot of the audience, but it feels like the more mature side of that audience, kind of, they're the ones that seek out and they find Isaac. They're like, what's Isaac? Because it's more, you're a nerdy engineer doing nerdy engineer stuff, and that's not something that you can really make fun of somebody for.
Yeah. Generally, it's my religious or political things that I say in a live stream. That's usually what brings on the hate. And again, I mean, in some ways, that is the least. Again, I want constructive criticism that I can learn from that is accurate. When people come at me and just say everything about your worldview is completely wrong because the Enlightenment, and it's like, well, hang on a second.
What? Fucking what?
And again, a lot of this is criticism that I've seen my parents deal with, and I've seen conservatives over especially recent years get more and more and more of. This is becoming kind of more of the norm, and it in some ways lessens the sting a bit, but it's also scary because I think that it opens the door for more and more and more vitriolic attack. So the accusations of you standing in the way of progress, like that's more extreme than probably what your parents got. That's probably more extreme than what I heard when I was when I was living in New Zealand. I was put in the very difficult position of having to defend George Bush. I wasn't exactly a George Bush fan, but the accusations against George Bush were the dumb ones. And so I had to stand up and be like, well, he's not actually the stupidest president America has ever had. Technically, that's wrong. But we've seen, the rhetoric of criticism on the internet and even in mainstream media just get ratcheted up higher and higher and higher. And I think that does have really scary connotations for our kids. And that's one of the reasons that I do want to try to diffuse things and not be too carried away by an emotional response to what's happening now. I do want to diffuse it, but at the same time, I also know that it could be a lot worse, and it's possible we'll see a lot worse. I know people who are dealing with much more difficult things in other parts of the world right now, and I want to try to have a kind of a measured or philosophical approach to this. But as meaningless and pointless as a lot of these insults are, they do not bode well for kind of the next 20 years. That's the thing that's concerning to me. The people that yell at me on YouTube, I don't actually think they're coming to my house.
Yeah.
But the kind of things that are getting said, that makes it okay for the next generation to come to my kids' houses, maybe. That's more my concern.
Yeah. I don't understand that there's this wide, and maybe it's growing, maybe it's not, but at least in my, narrow perception, which I will admit before anyone else could be very wrong, people are getting a lot more negative and a lot more vitriolic these days than they used to be. And I'm seeing it on other people's social media, and I'm seeing it on our social media. For example, the other day, after posting the handgun guide, and I realized that you guys have it 1,000 times worse than we do. There's people coming like, oh, you dumb, insert slur here. You only know this kind of this like one grip, you noob. It's like, how do you get so mad
Yeah.
over someone just like posting advice?
It,
Genuinely,
Well,
just like someone
especially,
posting free advice,
yeah.
like out of their
Well,
own pocket.
especially, you were very, I mean, you didn't like, this is the only way you can hold your pistol. Like, that was
Yeah,
not
it's
what
like,
you posted. You posted, here's
like,
three ways,
oh,
three
yeah.
ways that you can hold your pistol. One that is good, and two that are obviously terrible, and everybody knows. Like,
Yeah, it's like it's basic. If you want to get a better grip than that, by all fucking means, do it. And the guy's like, "Stay in your lane, Seaburn boy." I'm like, "What, dude? Are you okay?"
yeah.
Like, I genuinely want to ask, are you all right? Is everything okay at home?
yeah.
Like the people who get that mad over, for example, you or Lucas or anyone else giving free advice. And again, I agree with you on the constructive criticism thing. People can learn from that. That's in the word. It's constructive. But just insults over nothing. It's like, are you all right? Who shit in your breakfast this morning? Like, are things okay
It's
with the wife and kids?
definitely, yeah. And that's another reason that some of this level of discourse is discouraging to me. Is, yeah, I feel really bad for a lot of these folks. I do worry about them.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't mean that, as a backhanded insult. Like,
Yeah.
No,
truly
of
and
course.
honestly.
There's a lot
Yeah.
of insecurities within the gun industry, and we see people portraying their insecurities in ways of insults whenever somebody posts something that might not be how they do something. It's very it's very this way or no way. And in reality, there's a million different ways to do a million different things, but there is this weird, I think and I hope it's slowly starting to be phased out, but there's this idea that you have to do it this one way or you're wrong. You have to shoot this one way or you're wrong. If you don't do this drill and you don't do it this way, you're wrong. If you don't hold your weapon this way, you're wrong. If you don't do a mag change this way, you're wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's slowly being phased out. And I think there are a lot of different people to credit for that. But for a while, it wasn't, it was at full blast, I feel. And I think we're still kind of getting the echoes of it, but hopefully, maybe I'm just optimistic. It's slowly starting to turn more into, I want to know multiple ways to do something. That way, if I'm in a situation where I can't do it this one way, I know how to do it at least a little bit this way.
Yeah. I remember, God, I don't know why my brain just, Canada has this really fucking stupid licensing system in order for you to get a gun. And I remember doing the safety course a long time ago, which you have to do. It's just taught by a bunch of, old hunting boomers in, I don't know, some community center or something. And I remember, we all have to pick up the gun and hold it a certain way. Just, in this case, it was just a 12 gauge shotgun, like a friggin' Mossberg 500 or something with a 30-inch bird hunting barrel. So, I picked it up and held it just to demonstrate, 3/4 of the class are leaning backwards or, doing any of that. And God, this is years ago. And I remember this, over 10 years later, because this bothered me so much. And I pick it up and I hold it the way that I, know how to hold a shotgun, which is basically the same way I do it now, which is you lean into it a little bit, knee to your shoulder, all that fucking bullshit. Fuck it, like mag pull out of the dynamic shotgun, C clamp. I don't fucking know. All of that, like, and the instructor looks at me and he's like, "No, you can't do that. Fix yourself. If you hold it like that, the recoil is going to knock you over." And like I had to like stand up straight and like hold it against the side and like stand sideways against my target just to pass that course. And I feel like, I don't know, that's kind of an institutionalized version of this. It's like I learned this one way and no other way will work.
Yeah.
But mostly I just wanted to bitch about the Canadian firearms program. Go on.
Well, So we have similar things. I did a hunter safety course when I was probably 13 that was similar. It wasn't necessary for licensing per se, except I think when you're under 18. This was when we lived in, it's a pretty similar system, except it's not directly tied to owning a firearm. It's, getting a hunting license when you're underage or stuff like that. Now, I will say that I think that is going away partly. And I think you guys have it easy because you both were in the military. So you know everything about combat and fighting and guns.
Everything.
Yes,
And,
absolutely everything. Only
no one
people who
can
are in the military.
attack you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one will say anything
man.
to you.
Nobody.
Oh, man.
Well, one thing that is really interesting, and I do think it is getting better, but I think that part of it is because the gun industry and gun people have been so demonized and embattled for so long that all of us have our shields up. We all have our armor on. We're all kind of holding people at arm's length a little bit, and there's a crustiness and a grumpiness to the industry, which is unpleasant. But I get it, and it is, yes, there are jerks in all industries for sure. I don't actually feel like the firearm industry has a higher ratio of jerks than the medical industry or the military industrial complex that I've worked in briefly as a contractor, or the financial industry. In fact, compared to a lot of those industries, Hollywood. In many ways, the firearm industry is a breath of fresh air. But getting back to homeschooling, there's a thing that in the early days of homeschooling, when there was still a stigma attached to it, homeschoolers, the stereotype is, of course, that homeschool kids were nerdy and unsocialized, which isn't actually usually that accurate. But a stereotype, or rather something that didn't get stereotyped, but I think was largely true, is homeschool families were often kind of a little bit isolationist, a little bit standoffish, a little bit crusty, a little bit, had their dukes up a little bit too much. Not exactly a chip on their shoulder per se, but a little bit of just standoffishness. And I see that in the gun industry a little bit because I think that our industry is more. I mean, there's just a lot of restrictions. A huge percentage of the sitting politicians in the country are trying to literally destroy our industry and have been doing so for as long as any of us can remember. So I feel like, as frustrating as that is and unpleasant as that is, I really do get it. And I think we come by it relatively honestly. And so I think it would be really good for us to get along better, for sure. But anyway, that's just a random thought. Oftentimes it's difficult. One of the other things that homeschoolers did pretty well in the early days was, like, our parents in particular had to figure stuff out. There wasn't a whole bunch of turnkey curriculum that you could just buy off of Amazon. It was very hard to actually find homeschooling curriculum. It was kind of this new thing. There wasn't really the internet. So you'd go to the library and you'd hear about, maybe like the librarian would tell you about another homeschooling family that had come in earlier. There were physical newsletters that you should subscribe to if you figured out who to talk to. Like, it was this kind of weird Wild West sort of thing where you very much felt like you were on your own. And if it worked and it was succeeding, then you kind of developed this very independent way of doing things. Like, well, I've pulled out of the school system, I can do whatever. And brought that kind of attitude to a lot of different things. And that's another thing that I think a lot of gun folks have done, is a lot of the people who started these gun companies are people who used to have a corporate job that they hated and they left so they could do their own thing and they could pursue their passion. And one of the things that I feel like we're really blessed with at T.REX is all of us that have come together to be part of this company have brought with us a whole bunch of skill sets, and we get along relatively well. If you just want to be a machinist and you want to start a company and you hate HR and you hate accounting because your last corporate job, they were just a pain all the time, and so you really don't want to do that with your own company, well, your company is going to have trouble filling orders and growing. And some of the complaints that we have about various gun companies, I think kind of stem from some of that as well. So again, I'm very sympathetic to a lot of these issues as much as they do bug me. Yeah.
So you are one of the easiest guests that we've had because you bring up all these great transition moments for me, so I don't have to like think of them. You talked about the beginning of T.REX Arms a little bit and how kind of everybody had these past experiences coming together. Walk me through what's going on when Lucas decides that he's going to start a holster company and it's becoming something a little bit bigger. What's going through the mind of the bigger brother?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. To be honest, I missed part of the beginning of T.REX starting. So one of the things that is sort of interesting, before T.REX started, Lucas, myself, and the two Davids were all part of the Hickman County Volunteer Fire, or technically Rescue Squad. So the four T.REX people before T.REX were all doing this volunteer fire department thing together. And Lucas was also doing some medical training, just some other kind of first responder stuff. And I was doing video stuff. David had recently gotten married. Like, we were fairly distracted with different things. And so Lucas was very focused on this, fire department stuff, fire training, first responder training, medical training, etc. And that was when he started making holsters. And actually, technically, his first holster he made with a piece of Kydex that I bought and never did anything with. So I feel like I should get some credit for something. But it was a piece of Kydex that I had bought, done nothing with. It was lying around. Anyhow, now this was about this time. My wife is from Colorado. So as Lucas is doing a lot of this really early beginning of T.REX stuff, I'm actually living in Colorado. And so I kind of missed the beginning of the company. And as it's growing and it's developing and I'm keeping tabs on it, I think I am very... I feel like I am very supportive and helpful to Lucas, but I'm also not imagining that it becomes a very large, successful business that I'm going to work for one day. And so I'm watching his shooting videos. I'm actually very impressed with how quickly he's getting good at shooting, because while we have all, enjoyed guns, appreciated guns, the level of training has always been, relatively low. Certainly nothing like what Lucas was doing. Lucas is at this stage when I'm in Colorado and he's been making the first few hundred plastic holsters. He's gone from someone who has shot a gun several times, enjoys plinking with a 22 rifle, and is kind of that level of gun person, to someone who is doing quite well in competition. And so I'm kind of seeing this in time lapse, because I'm in Colorado for a while. I come back, I see what's going on. So I see this in a pretty accelerated kind of way, and it's very impressive. But I'm not really involved in the holster company very much. I would come along and I would help out during Black Friday making holsters in the pre-CNC days, and watching it grow and talking. At this point, it is Lucas, David, and David who are the three partners of the company. And I'm watching them. I'm trying to remember exactly how long it was a one-man band. For a long time, it was just Lucas. And then he had a couple folks from church helping out with things here or there. And then it became a partnership. They began hiring people. And it was just really, really cool to see several things. It was cool to see everybody working on a project together. It was cool to see Lucas really coming into his own, both as a shooter, but also as a lot of things: craftsman, designer. I wasn't really thinking businessman at that point, because it was still small enough. It was still just a handful of people working in a garage. I wasn't really seeing Lucas as a businessman exactly. I kind of began to see him that way and think of him that way a little bit later on. But as a marketer, yeah, it was really fun to see all of these things come together out of Lucas, and all of these strengths that he had as a kid, that it was like, I have no idea how that's ever going to be useful. Like, I don't know. Like, one of the things that Lucas was really good at as a kid was he was really good at archery, like snap shooting from the hip archery. And it was like, well, that's kind of a weird, like freakishly good hand-eye coordination thing that I don't really know how that comes into play later. But it's really neat, as the company is growing and seeing all of these gifts and talents in my brothers that I haven't really seen, because we haven't really done anything, this type of business or this type of craftsmanship coming together, is really super fun. And I'm still, at this point, I'm recently married and no longer part of the fire department because I've been in Colorado for too long, and I've gone inactive and various projects, and I'm still working as the freelance video guy. That's still kind of my main pursuit at this point. And I forget exactly the conversation. I've always been fascinated by 3D printers and CNC machines and manufacturing, but haven't really done any of it. And this is a conversation that usually my brother David and I have had about wanting to have more tools, more capability to do certain things. And about the time that James is born, that's Heidi and I's first child. James is born, and that's about the time when David comes to me and is like, hey, our volume is here. We really probably need a CNC machine at this point. Nobody has time to learn how to do it. It seems like the sort of thing that you could learn how to do. What do you think? And that was when I started researching CNC machines, CNC routers, and I knew that I had a little bit of a head start because what I'd been doing most recently in video production was animation, 3D animation mostly, and so building three-dimensional models of things. I knew I had a head start in that area. I knew that was part of the CNC process. So that was when I joined the company, and we bought a used CNC machine from a crusty old sign maker down in New Orleans, and got it wired up in our unheated shop that we were working in, which is like a little garage building. And I spent that winter just tinkering with this machine and trying to figure out what it was and how it worked and how we were going to make holsters on it. So it was a really interesting, really fascinating. And ever since then, it's just been more problems to solve, just different problems, more opportunities to learn new stuff. So
that's so friggin' cool. Have you tried your resin printer yet?
Yes, we printed a bunch of stuff with resin, and it's not as cool as, I mean, it's extremely cool. It's not as sturdy as I had hoped.
What kind of resin are you using?
We're using I can't remember now.
Like eSun washable or the PLA?
We're using eSun BLU, the blue stuff. I think it's supposed to be a little bit sturdier.
Oh, Soraya Tech?
Soraya Blue, yes.
Oh,
Soraya
yeah. I really recommend the eSun Hard and Tough. It's it's a lot stronger. It's way less brittle. I can if you want to write that down, as
cool.
it appears you're doing. eSun Hard and Tough. I have a hard time breaking it, like with a hammer, with whatever.
Cool.
That being said, it's a lot more flexible than Soraya, which is brittle.
There's a couple of products that I can't talk about right now that would certainly benefit from a sturdier prototype, even if it were flexible.
Yeah. Oh, well, there you go. Highly recommend the eSun. We've tried Liquid. No worries. Liquid Create is what we're using in the shop now. We're printing a bunch of like night vision stuff with it.
Nice.
And it's good, but it falls. It's on paper much stronger than the eSun, but it is more It's more temperature resistant, but also more brittle. I'd recommend the eSun stuff first. It's also way cheaper.
Okay, definitely.
Yeah. Sorry, we won't get into this right now. This is
no. So this is fascinating to me. So I'm a geek and a nerd. So this technical thing is very interesting. That's part of the reason that I jumped at, the opportunity. I didn't think of myself as an engineer. I didn't think of myself as a manufacturing or business person, but the opportunity to tinker with CNC machines was extremely cool. And so the opportunity to come along and do stuff with T.REX automation front was really neat. But since then, now that I've gotten my hands dirty, like I have an appreciation for some of this new manufacturing technology beyond just, the cool tinkering factor, like what it can actually do and what it actually means for decentralized manufacturing, economically and culturally, I think is super cool. So I love it.
Yeah.
So you're in Colorado, kind of going back and forth with your brother, who's starting out this holster company. You're seeing him grow. What are you doing in Colorado? Like, what did you have to leave in order to come and start working for T.REX?
Oh, so I was I was just in Colorado to hang out with my wife's family and get to know her better. And this is actually kind of dumb. So the first part of our relationship was a long distance relationship. And then like halfway through, I realized wait a minute, why am I doing this? My work is all on a laptop. Why am I not just in Colorado right now?
Hmm.
It took me a while to figure that out. So my plan was always to come back to Tennessee and live near my family. As much as I love my wife's family, as much as I really appreciate how beautiful Colorado is, the plan was always to come back to Tennessee. I just thought that I was going to continue to be doing Tennessee community stuff, not necessarily holster stuff. I wasn't really sure what that looked like. Um, I guess I just assumed that it was going to continue to be commercial video, freelance video type things, which when you're living with your parents is relatively easy to make that work. But once you're married and you have kids, it's like you have to be a pretty good salesman to make your freelance video empire something that you can grow.
I was long distance with my wife in Colorado. She was from Colorado too, and I was long distance with her for a while. And it it's funny because you guys are in Tennessee. Before I even knew who T.REX Arms was, before I knew anything about that, I drove through Tennessee. Tennessee is gorgeous. It reminds me so much of home,
Mm.
except it's way more humid, and I hate the humidity. But I'm from upstate New York, and I haven't been home in
Hmm.
years at this point. I was NCOIC at cadet summer training in Kentucky, but we would convince the brand new LTs that were allowed to have vehicles, we weren't, to drive us through Tennessee to go to Nashville. And I remember driving through, and I'm like, farmland, lots of green. Like this is just like home, and I felt like I was at home for a little bit. It was so gorgeous. Um, no, but that's cool. You traveled out to Colorado to hang out with your wife, get to know your wife's family. I'm essentially doing that now. 5 years into my marriage, we finally were able to get
Yeah.
out in Colorado. But and then that's that's great. And you saw your little brother doing stuff. I think we talked a little bit off the air. I was trying to picture my little brothers or sisters starting a company, and I would be so supportive, but because I've seen them grow up and I've seen like cuz we're all kids. We all do dumb stuff, but when you're the oldest, you don't get to see like yourself doing dumb stuff. And
Oh, of course not. You're infallible.
yeah, you're like the alpha. You're top of the food chain. And I just look at my little brothers and sisters. My little brothers are still in high school, so maybe not
Wait,
them, but
wait.
my little sister. And I just try and picture, and I'm like, man, if you started, or, man, my sister, she's very successful. She's might be on the U.S. women's national soccer team. Coming up for the next World Cup and Olympics. But besides that, I try and picture her starting like a company, and even her doing greater things like in sports than I ever did. I look at her and I just see my little sister eating sand, just doing. I don't know. It must be. I mean, I'm sure like now it's normal, but at first, seeing your little sibling do this great thing and getting really, really, really good at something,
Hmm.
it's it's strange because I see with my sister. I was a goalkeeper, she's a goalkeeper. I played a little bit over in a really low division in Italy, and she's about to go be like, playing on the national team for the women, like way more successful than I ever was with soccer. And I still look at her and I'm like, yeah, it's my little sister. She ate sand. She used to make turkey cheese and ketchup sandwiches. Like I know all these weird quirks about her, and I can only picture like starting a business that is such in the public light as the older brother. It's got to be, fascinating.
It is very well. The good news is I've had practice doing that because all of my younger siblings have really excelled in certain areas that are just utterly beyond my abilities, sometimes beyond my comprehension. Like my brother Ben is an amazing composer. Um, Everyone was somewhat musical compared to me, but Ben was an amazing composer. And so I've had some practice kind of learning to do this. My brother David is incredible. My sisters are incredible. Noah is the programmer for T.REX Arms. He's written almost all of the code that makes the whole website and e-commerce and the back-end inventory management system. Like all of that is custom code that Noah has either done himself, or now we actually have a software development team that he is running. So it's not just him. But yeah, I have watched my siblings take things that I had a passing interest in here or there, and I was like, oh, I'm pretty good at this, and just take it utterly beyond what my capabilities were. So by the time Lucas was doing that, I had eaten a fair amount of humble pie and learned how to wrap my brain around that a bit.
Does everybody, like all your siblings, work now under T.REX Arms?
No, at this point, so it's the girls are doing their own projects, and my brother Ben, he actually wrote a bunch of the music for the early T.REX Arms videos, but he is too successful and too busy to do anything like that now. He's doing all kinds of stuff with the studio. So yeah, he's well, actually, no, he used to bend holsters too occasionally. So he was a very good holster bender when he wasn't busy writing music, composing music for films or video games. But yeah, you can still hear a lot of his music in T.REX videos, but he's no longer writing custom bespoke music for us because we can't afford him.
But that's still interesting though, because you work so closely with your family. And I mean, not all of them, as you said, but all your siblings, and being the oldest and watching, because you're doing the nerdy engineer stuff where you get all the constructive criticism because nobody's gonna, not everybody has an opinion about the engineer stuff, and the people
Yeah.
that do are usually the ones that are constructive about it. Uh, that dynamic amongst, because it's not just your family doing it, you have all these other people now.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks at the shop now. It's that's in some ways that's been a harder adjustment than working with family, because when we were young and we would help dad with his projects, we were all working together. So working together is fairly normal. And then when I worked on other people's projects, I was working on teams. So working with non-family is totally normal. But yeah, now we have this family project that employs a bunch of people. That's kind of interesting. That's kind of weird.
Hmm.
Now, fortunately, we've grown over a few years, so there's been a little bit of time to adjust. But yeah, it's I've worked on the outsides of big companies, but not inside, so that I have a really good understanding of how you structure a big company. And T.REX is not a big company, but T.REX is as big a company as I've ever understood.
You're
So we're
getting
now
there.
at the limits of my understanding of how big a company can be.
Getting into that as well, the cohesiveness seems to be like everybody always seems to be on the same page. Everything seems coordinated, well thought out, and planned. And you heard me talk about this before on the other podcast. One of the most interesting things to me is just how coordinated everybody at the company is. When something happens, anything, be it that the dude's video, or maybe just something with the mod, was it Modlight or Surefire? I don't even remember. I try not to keep up with it, but it seems like
But we'll
whenever
pretend like there's a hypothetical company. Yeah.
yeah. Any hypothetical company. It seems like whenever something happens, be it good or bad, everybody is on the same page. And I'm super curious about how that works. If you can talk about that online. If not, no big deal.
Yeah. Well, I won't talk about any specifics, but I don't think I have to talk about specifics because the short answer is we're not on the same page all the time. There's plenty of issues where we go back and forth on what's the best way to do this or what's the best way to do that, or this thing happened, which is very problematic. Like one thing that we have talked about a bit more recently is we had a supplier making us a product that was supposed to be made in Mexico,
Right.
or no, it was supposed to be made in the United States, supposed to be very compliant, had all the certificates. We started finding made in Mexico tags. There was wild, not exactly disagreement, there was wild diversity of opinions on what we should do with that whole situation and how to handle the situation relating to this, relating to that. But we ended up on the same page. So one of the things that I think is really, really helpful is we always want to end up on the same page. So one of the things that we I believe have done a pretty good job is we wait till we're on the same page to make a decision or to talk about stuff publicly, so that we're not stepping on each other's toes. That doesn't always work out. There's plenty of times when, this ball gets dropped or that ball gets dropped, but we really want to all be together on things. We're trying to accomplish the same goals, which helps. And so when a thing happens, like we're developing the new sidecar, we run into a quality control issue. Well, we all want to fix it. We'll have different ideas of how to fix it. We work that out amongst ourselves, knowing that we're trying to accomplish the same goal. And then once we have a solution, that's when we're actually on the same page, we're actually together, that's when we actually move forwards. Now, what's tricky is if you're in a situation where something is so pressing, so urgent that you got to move forward before there's been a conversation. At that point, you have to just kind of trust the guy who is running that play and go along with it. But generally speaking, we've tried to not let the tyranny of the urgent drive us to make decisions before we have talked about them, and I think that has helped a lot. Yeah.
So there's that discourse, and that discourse, like we talked about earlier, having all these different experiences and different minds come together with different, perspectives can be very beneficial. I said it seems like everybody's on the same page because that is the image that is put out. But obviously, in any business or in any friendship or in any relationship, even, there's always going to be things that happen that it just happens kind of quietly, or that isn't what's being, publicly made available for folks. I do want to point out that one thing, while you said, you might not always agree or come to the same conclusion, it still seems like everybody is like, hey, you know what, maybe I didn't get my way this time, but we're a company, we're a team, we're moving forward, and we're going to support it. And that's something that I don't see happening too often. That is one thing that I've noticed with T.REX Arms. It seems you guys are always on the same page, and that is the public image that's put out. And I in no way thought behind the scenes everybody is always on the same page together, but it is always interesting to see anything happens, and it seems like everybody is kind of moving in the same direction. All right, 2, 1. I don't remember what we were talking about before.
I'm sorry, I keep on
we had to stop because we were saying tremendously unpopular things about the United States military.
Yeah, that's right. Nothing I
so
haven't
none of
said
that, none of that, none of that needs to be recorded. But I will say we talked backwards into history, and then we had come back forwards into history up till World War II. I will say you were talking about a phenomenal experience that's incredible. I had a similar one. This is one of the highlights of my life. I worked on a documentary about Iwo Jima. I actually got to go to Iwo Jima with a bunch of World War II vets who fought there. That was incredible. And it's, first of all, it's just an insanely rare opportunity, but also just to experience it with those guys. A lot of them were going back for the very first time since that battle. A lot of them were taking their kids and their grandkids with them, and I was running a camera and documenting this, but I had a lot of opportunities to talk to these guys. And yeah, no, that was incredibly special. And yeah, so that's something that is it comes back. I remember it and think about those guys, especially now at this point. I grew up around a lot of World War II vets, and I have introduced my kids to a couple, but by the time my kids are old enough to remember, there really won't be any anymore.
Yeah.
Which is really, really sobering. The Vietnam vets that were my dad's age, those are the old timey vets that they're going to grow up with, which is kind of an interesting thing, because we were when we weren't recording, we were talking very fondly about the World War II generation, and specifically the U.S. military of that era. And I really appreciate having gotten to spend time with guys who experienced that, the good and the bad, and I think thought very clearly about it. I really appreciate those opportunities that I had to spend time with those men.
They have such a great outlook on life, surprisingly, for all the horrible things that they might have witnessed. I mean, my grandfather witnessed his brother-in-law, his future brother-in-law, before he married my grandmother, he witnessed him burning alive. Like it was an awful experience. But he'll talk about it now. Like one of the things I asked my grandparents to do, my grandmother passed away when I was a little bit younger, but what I asked her to do and what I asked my grandfather to do, my grandmother loved to cook, so I asked her to write a cookbook for me, and she did. I still have it, but I also asked my grandfather, I'm like, hey, you always talk about the war. If you could write down like a timeline of all your experiences, whatever you're comfortable with doing, like I would love to have that. And every time I see him, I mean, he gave me a ton of papers, but every time I see him, he's like, oh, I remembered this one time where whatever, was happening. And he talks so fondly about awful things that happen. Not fondly, but he talks so
Mhm.
nonchalantly about witnessing all these terrible, awful things. But he has such a unique perspective with it where he's like, yeah, we were fighting the Nazis and, the Nazis were doing this stuff, but I went back and I visited Germany and they're good people. They're good people over there. They were good people then. It was just a bad time in history. And it's always
Mm.
interesting to hear their perspective. And I found myself in the fortunate situation to not just get my grandfather's perspective, but like we were talking about a little off air when I did the jump into Normandy with them and that whole event, like just getting to talk and experience. You, they say like respect your elders. I love talking. I love talking with those old time folks because, like you said, our kids aren't going to be able to experience that. Our kids will experience
Mhm.
the Vietnam vets, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's such a vastly different era of military and people. Uh,
Yeah.
it,
Yeah. Those guys got a different kind of really rough experience. I think, and that is one of the fascinating things that the way that vets who fought these horrifically brutal battles. Iwo Jima is just mind-bogglingly awful. Like it's one of the best examples of pure warfare that I can think of. No cover, no room to maneuver. Like it's just fighting. There's no room for tricks. There's barely room for tactics. It is just fighting. And yet with modern equipment, modern weapons, and all that implies. But those guys, their attitude toward the Japanese men that they had been fighting, their attitude toward the Japanese men that were on the island, that were part of the delegation, because it is an active military base, Iwo Jima radar base. One of the things that I think is really interesting is if you have a good grasp on reality, you have a good mission, you have a good definition of evil, you can call out evil very clearly, very plainly. You can fight it, and then you can know what isn't evil, and you can be on really good terms with the people who are there, the people who are in Germany, the people who are in Japan during occupation. And I think that's one of the huge things that we're missing right now. So we can't really define evil very well, and so we have to make an opposing political person be evil. We have to make a certain group be evil, and it's them who are evil, just incarnate in themselves. And then you have to be better, and have to hate those people forever, because
it
that's your new definition.
Right. And it's funny how throughout history the enemies have changed. I feel like back then they were very well defined and very obvious. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
take any, you know, manipulation. They didn't take any falsification of whatever. It was the Nazis are killing people. They are bad people. Like what they're doing is wrong. It was very clear, very defined, at least for the people on our side of the world. In Germany, I'm sure it was very different.
I thought,
Yeah.
not to play devil's advocate here, because it's kind of the worst thing to play devil's advocate for. Genuinely the worst fucking thing. I thought they found out about the Holocaust afterwards. There were allegations, but we didn't really find out about it until we found the camps.
For a lot of folks, for sure, yeah, that was something. There were various
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
various atrocities, and obviously we're allies with England, and London is being bombed.
Yeah.
We're seeing Paris being occupied. Like I think that for a lot of people, that's just like, oh, this is just war. This is like kind of normal conventional warfare. Our allies are under attack. It's time for us to go over there and do normal conventional warfare stuff to get rid of this this is just another one of the times when Germany wants to take over the world. So we just got to go deal with that the way that we normally do.
Oh, it's happening again.
Yeah. Have you seen, there's a Norm Macdonald bit where he's like, Germany decided to go to war, and for their enemy, they chose the world. It had never been tried before. You'd think that'd be over in a few minutes. It was actually close. And 30 years later, they did it again.
Yep.
So, but it is really interesting. A lot of the guys that I talked to who were in the European theater talked about the fact that, yes, we were fighting the Nazis, but then once we were actually in Germany, the German people were the ones who it felt the most like home. Like Holland and Germany felt the most like home. France was weird, but once you got to Germany, the people were nice, they were polite. It actually felt more like home. It felt more like America than a lot of the European countries that they'd been stationed in, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, there's a very weird dynamic. I think it happens more often than not. Maybe not in Vietnam, because it seems like everybody in Vietnam was kind of against what was going on. But at least when I was in Afghanistan,
That's an
like,
understatement of the year.
but even in Afghanistan, depending on where we were and what we were doing, like when we drove through Kabul, it's probably one of the most terrifying things that I've ever done, because you're in a very clear and obvious place that people do not want you. The locals did not want us there. Even little kids would come out and throw rocks at us, and it was very obvious they didn't like us there. But then we would go to some smaller villages, and we wouldn't be going to do anything. We wouldn't go with our big loud trucks. We would just kind of pass through. They were very kind, very hospitable, very friendly, and the people and the culture of Afghanistan, I think, a lot. I mean, it's very unique and great in some ways, but they have the unfortunate, downside of they're plagued with this war, and it's not just the Taliban or Al Qaeda of the past. It's now ISIS-K too. There's
Yeah.
all these different groups of people that are willing to do terrible things to each other to grab power, and there's just people living in the middle of it, and they are hospitable, nice people. It's strange. It's really strange.
Yeah. It's Afghanistan for a long time has basically been the punching bag of the world. It's really upsetting to see and even think about, but yeah.
Yeah. And yet it's also, very few people make it out of Afghanistan. They go there to take this territory, and it is the graveyard of empires.
It is.
It's not something that it's not as easy as it looks. What's the saying? I forget when this was. This was who said this, but it was some Afghan leader in Alexander the Great's time, I believe, who said, "You may defeat us, but you will never defeat our poverty." Like you come in here,
Yeah.
like you'll regret it. You can kill us, but we'll endure, and you won't.
What were you doing in New Zealand?
Oh, so this is an excellent question that sounded completely normal, and not as if an earlier bit about a different country got cut out for security reasons. So my dad really wanted us kids to spend some time outside of the United States, just as a learning experience. So we moved to New Zealand when I had just turned 18, and we were there for 6.5 years, something like that. And yeah, it was really phenomenal. I think that was a tremendous experience for all of us. Learning experience, getting to see outside of the culture that we'd been grown up in. Now, that being said, New Zealand is not like a wildly different culture. It is a very comfortable Western culture. There isn't even a language barrier. But yeah, we were down there doing just kind of the regular stuff that we had been doing, media stuff. I worked for some television stations, worked on some television shows, worked on a couple of movies down there. It was a phenomenal experience, I think, for all of us kids to spend time out of the United States. And it's something that I really want for my own kids. But looking at the state of the world and lockdowns and COVID stuff, it's just like, I don't actually know how to do that. Actually, it's hard to practically even think through, but they're still very young. I have time for the world to sort itself out, which I'm sure it will do in just like no time. They'll just figure it out, I'm sure.
I would love to do that for my kids too, because while I wasn't necessarily, a younger kid, my first deployment, I put that in air quotes, was to Ukraine during the Civil War in 2014, 2015, and I mean before.
Okay.
So getting to experience a different culture in the middle of that was something so unique. I don't know if I'd bring my kids to a country that's in the middle of a civil war, but I would love for my kids to get that perspective of living outside of the United States, because
Hmm.
it is looking back on my years that I spent in Europe, it was some of the most valuable experiences I was able to get. I was able to learn different countries' perspectives, different cultures, different beliefs, and different foods. Everything was different in every different country, and it was it was a great experience, because you see how different people deal with different problems, and you're able to take some things that they do and apply that to yourself, or maybe you're able to see how poorly certain things are going. And I was always a curious type. I'm like, why are things going this poorly here? And then I look into it, and then
Mhm.
I'm like, well, these are definitely some telltale signs that something's going to go poorly, because there is a real life example of this thing going poorly. And it allows me to have this perspective where I can now come home and I can look at everything around, and I can see signs of things. And I see certain things happening, and I'm like, I've seen this before. I've seen this before in you know be it the Baltic states, or maybe I saw it in an already like a country like Germany or Italy, in modern day,
Mhm.
or maybe Afghanistan. And having that perspective is so unique. And I would love to give my daughter and any future kids that experience. But like you said, I don't know in the state of the world if that's something that I want to do right now.
How do you
Yeah.
mean?
Well,
Oh, he's not allowed in because everything's
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Europe is
Okay.
closed. Go home.
yeah,
Disregard. We're all. I don't
it's
want to use the word deplorable because that implies we vote for Trump. We're all. Fuck. I'm missing words. I'm
yep,
missing words.
yep. We're
Undesirables.
yep. That
Well, it's really interesting. Like it's only a few years ago that everybody in Europe was like, open borders. And for the last 2 years, it's like, no,
no.
Europe is closed.
Yes.
it I have some of my friends that got caught in Europe, and they got stuck there for a little bit in the beginning of this whole thing. And they got stuck there, and they're like, yeah, we're kind of in limbo. And then some of them would be like, I got in trouble for showing up late to my unit because I wasn't allowed to leave my old unit. And I'm like, what? What is what's going on here? And I mean, they
Yeah.
never ended up getting in serious trouble, but they started to. And then it was like, oh, well, people weren't allowed to come and go. So I guess you're excused. But it's
Yeah.
weird. It's weird. I don't see us going back to normal. I don't see it. I think the powers that be use this as a great power grab, and why would they let go of it?
Yeah. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what happens because I agree with you. I don't think anybody currently in a position of power is going to say, oh, this was a mistake. Let's quickly go back 2 years and get rid of all the policies that we put into place in the last 2 years. I don't see that at all. At the same time, though, all the policies that have been put in place in the last 2 years are not tenable. They cannot continue the way that they are.
Oh
And
Jesus,
so
yeah.
something's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And as someone who has visited the Baltic nations at that particular time, or Ukraine during the Civil War and various unpleasantness, like things things break down relatively quickly when once you actually hit a breaking point. And there are countries like the United States and lots of countries in Europe. I think that it's really easy for us to forget
Yeah.
the possibility of this happening because we haven't seen this in our lifetimes. Our parents haven't seen this in their lifetimes, so obviously it's impossible. And
People.
I am afraid that not only is this possible, it's actually the norm throughout human history. And a lot of countries are hanging on to their what's the right word for it? They're hanging on to the status quo with such a tight grip that they're actually making the situation worse. Everything is getting more brittle and more fragile as opposed to sturdier because of how tightly
Australia.
they're trying to hang on to stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's unfortunate that is happening. And I feel like the best thing that people could be doing is building some of the local, more resilient structures as backups. Like, are the giant pillars and arches of your civilization toppling? Well, maybe build some more real quick, as opposed to like, no, I'm just going to hang more stuff on this arch. I'm just going to throw some more weight way out onto this edge of the Colosseum. It's like, no, start building some auxiliary structures here. And then you'll be in a better position to help folks if it happens sooner rather than later.
I feel that speaks to a larger problem with society in general. And I completely agree with you to preface, but unfortunately, and as I see it, and again, like I absolutely think we should focus on building those structures, but a lot of people, especially people who aren't used to having a community, people who don't have those ties, people especially in the big cities and everything else, who um a lot of people want a band-aid solution. A lot of people want, to take their Tylenol and the headache goes away, as opposed to really attacking the root cause of what the
Yeah.
problem is. And politicians will play to that. They'll absolutely play to that, and usually the solution is a band-aid solution, which actually makes it worse. You're putting band-aid after band-aid after band-aid on top of an infection, and as long as you ignore the infection, it's going to get worse and worse. And it's kind of where we've got to as a society.
Yeah, I agree. And it's an interesting thing because selfishly you want to just, yeah, there's yes, there's a boil on the body politic that must be lanced. None of us
Yeah.
want to deal with that.
No
Maybe
one
it
wants to
will
deal
be a
with
problem in the next generation's
it. Yeah.
time frame.
Yeah, either that or we're going to be like, I don't know, eating cockroaches in the Commonwealth. I don't know. They're like eating rad roaches, sorry. But
I
we'll see what happens.
I think the good thing though is that kind of what you were saying, Isaac, is that you build that local community, and even though the whole country might be going in the wrong direction and starting to collapse or whatever you might think about that, if you're able to build that local connection and that local community and just get to know your neighbors. Something super simple that I'm more than happy to talk about what we did is, during COVID, I was still getting paid. I know this was at peak when everybody was uncertain and it was going to kill everybody, and it was this awful, awful thing. I was still getting paid. I still had money, but I know that the people that live above me, share a wall with, and across from me, they didn't, because we kind of vaguely talked about it. So something super simple is just inviting them over for dinner. It's, hey, we're
Yeah.
making a crock pot stew and come hang out with us. It's simple, just get to know those people around you. And whether you agree with them politically or disagree, I think that's all irrelevant. At this point, it seems to be the most relevant thing to a lot of people. To me, it's one of the more irrelevant things, because things are going to get worse before they get better. And
Absolutely.
in that time where it gets worse, none of that stuff I think is going to matter. And
Yeah.
just helping people and building that community around you. I mean, that's something that we're trying to do. We're looking at land to go hang out with all of our friends and help each
Yeah.
other out and build something, and hopefully help out the local community as well in any way that we can. It's something that is becoming more popular, I believe, but also in a way more demonized. It's
Yeah.
it's really strange times. I know I keep saying that, but it's strange.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fascinating sort of development. And I guess you could point out a lot of things. Like, there's a lot of situations where, with various coronavirus related mandates, people have said like, well, you need to do this in order to keep working. And people have said, fine, I'll leave my job then. Like, no, you're not allowed to leave your job. It's like, well, you actually presented that as not only an option, but something that you seem like you're pushing me towards. So I'm taking it. And yeah, this is kind of getting demonized. It reminds me just a little bit, not to make homeschooling the callback that we always go back to, but it reminds me a little bit of homeschooling when my parents pulled us out of school, or rather, were not schooling us to begin with. We were living part of that time in a small town where um, the locals really wanted us to be part of the school system. They really wanted however many extra students we were at that time to be in school so they could get money from us being enrolled there. And they didn't want us for our athletic prowess. I was terrible at sports, but they really wanted us to be in the system, because us being in the system not only was it weird for us not to be there, but I think there was also this financial aspect to it. And I think that people who check out of failing systems today are definitely going to be more and more demonized, because well, you'll be catching the blame potentially for checking out of a system that was failing before you were even born, because you're trying to go build something separately, and that's just really easy to do. I think that's just human nature. Look for somebody to blame, and so I think that's something that we need to be aware of and ready for, which also kind of ties back to our previous conversation about online criticism and stuff. So yeah, I would say expect more of that. Um, expect more of that, but don't be daunted by it. It is really imperative to, in many ways, I feel like it's very imperative to the people who are throwing sticks and rocks at you that you set a good example for them, um, and then hopefully they come along at some point. If you let them dissuade you from doing the right things, they may have nobody to help them out later.
I like this. We're in this on a wholesome note.
Isaac, are you familiar with like the Milgram obedience experiments and just
I'm very. We talk about that occasionally at T.REX. My brother David likes to apply it to all kinds of things because, yeah, it's a fascinating thought experiment. It's an even more fascinating practical experiment.
Yeah, they're absolutely fascinating, and I apply that a lot to just things in my daily life, and especially how I deal with the public and people as a whole, and how I process situations. It's simultaneously depressing, but it also helps you rationalize why people think and act the way they do. It's a little
Mhm.
depressing, but we won't get into it right now. That's a conversation for off air.
Well, I think there's definitely a way to resist that. I think it's really important that people understand the Milgram experiment shows that it is easier to obey
Yes.
a unpleasant command
Yeah.
than it is to actually take a moral stand. So one
Yes.
of the things that I think is really important about that experiment is to realize, yeah, that's your natural state. Um, and then once you realize that that is the case, then you can decide, well, I don't like that. I want to push back against that.
Yeah.
And that's something that I really want to enculturate into my kids. That's something that I really want to communicate to people, um, in any way that I can. Is courage is an incredibly important aspect to life. All of the stuff that we've talked about throughout this podcast, maybe especially the stuff that got cut out, talking about heroes of the past, amazing things that have been done for culture and for civilization and the saving of human life. Like all of that required vast amounts of courage. And it usually also involved vast amounts of sacrifice, which is why courage was necessary. So the Milgram experiment is on one hand, it is an example of the weakness and depravity of the human heart, but it also is a great example of the need for courage. Like teach your kids to
Absolutely.
have courage, because only you can stop Milgram experiments.
Yeah. 80% of people went for it and killed or killed or severely wounded the actor that they had. But also 20% of people didn't.
Yeah,
And that's 20% of people that'll stand up to authority and say, no, we're
yeah.
not going to do this.
And that experiment is something you can take to other people and be like, hey, be the 20%.
Yeah.
Like take that 20%, make it 21.
Yeah, absolutely.
If that's all you can do, then that's all you can do, but you got to do that.
I like that answer a lot, actually.
It's good. It's good to hear. It's good to hear and confirm that there are other people that kind of have the same thought process when it comes to having kids or raising kids, because you talk about homeschooling your kids and trying to figure out how they're going to learn. That's one thing I talked about with Bree, Lady Voluntary, the woman that we did the
she's
homeschooling
lovely.
episode with. A lot of my questions with homeschooling, I think, are a lot of other people's questions with homeschooling. But when I think about how I want my kids to be raised, and I think about my education that I got in a public school, and I just think about all the things that I had to teach myself that I could have learned at a young age, and I don't want my daughter to go through a similar thing where she's like mid-20s and she's just, learning about things that she could have learned as a kid, to where it's not shocking to her, when she learns about different countries and that the US doesn't have this super pure, awesome, righteous history. It's one of those things where, I question why I didn't know that Canada was involved in the war in 1812. I had no idea. The Canadians are taught that they beat us in the war. That's one thing that blows my mind. The Canadians
That's
are taught-
something we actually talked about. Like,
Yeah.
I was taught in school that we beat the Americans in the War of 1812. We didn't fucking
Well,
exist in the War of
How
1812.
could our hat beat us?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
It's strange. But it's good to know, and it's good to confirm. One of the best things about this podcast is not only getting to talk with all these people that I'm just genuinely interested in as people, it's confirming that they are just awesome, legitimate people. And I think that you definitely you fit that category. And I'm super happy that you came on, and super happy we got to talk more about the off the air stuff that everybody's going to be super jealous about, that they'll never get to hear.
That was fascinating. There's so much stuff that I want to ask you about that we didn't get to. I want to talk about art and drawing.
Oh, we can.
Yes,
We still got time.
We'll have to do it a different time, I'm afraid.
Oh, that's okay.
Because I got to run. But I do want to do that. We could do that on air. We could do that off air. It depends on what you guys think.
We can do a bit of both, because I'm sure our audience would appreciate hearing us. And I mean, I don't have too much to hide. Too much, and anything we do, we can just take out like we did here. I mean, we can do both. We can talk off the air and on the air, but I'm in a similar situation like you were. In about 15 minutes, I got to go cook dinner because my wife's about to put the baby down, and it's our time to hang out.
Cool. Well, I got to go get ready to put kids to bed. So,
of course,
different time zones, different ages of kids. So, time to go read. I think we're finishing My Side of the Mountain tonight.
Oh,
probably.
Well, you guys have cool stuff to do. I hear the cat scratching at the door, so I'm going to let him in, and the other cat's probably also there, so I'm going to let her in as well. I think your guys' things are a lot more important than mine.
That's fine. But
I really liked this, and I'm really looking forward to doing a part 2 if you're amenable.
Part 2 off the air.
I love chatting with you guys. My favorite part was, of course, all the stuff that got cut.
Yep.
That was amazing.
Yes. That was the
Can't
great.
I'm sorry,
stuff.
plebeians, you can't listen to that.
Yeah, sorry.
You're not good enough.
It's exclusive. Well, we appreciate you coming on. If you want, you can talk about where people can find you. I'm sure if they're listening, they already know where they can find you. But take time. Talk.
At the moment, I think you can still Google us. I think you can still Facebook us for now. We haven't gotten completely zooked yet, but just look us up. T.REX Arms. TREX-arms.com is how we say it, so you can spell it. And and keep doing what you guys are doing. I appreciate the guides. I appreciate the lighthearted look that you have at the industry. I think that you guys are a huge encouragement to people who need encouraging, and I think that you guys are a little gentle, an appropriate poke, but a very gentle poke to just a few little things that need poking. So I think you do that really, really good naturedly and really acceptably. So. But the encouragement is the vast majority of what you do. I think that's highly appreciated.
Yeah,
we appreciate
thank you. That actually means a lot.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to the part 2, and you keep doing what you're doing. I'm in no way financially obligated or sponsored in any way by T.REX Arms, but I've ordered a ton of shit from you guys, and it has been amazing, and I will continue to do so.
I have your new
Well,
holster.
I appreciate that. Send feedback, of course, to our marvelous customer service team if you think there are things that need to be improved.
I'm going to send awful, non-constructive criticism.
Fantastic. I'm going to pay this much attention to it.
All right. Thank you very much, and thanks for listening.
Thanks. Have a great night.
Yep. Okay, bye.